Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Today, it's a real pleasure to be joined by Kat Johnson. Kat, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background for our worldwide audience today. Over to you, Kat.
Thank you for having me, Simon. I'm so pleased to be here. So my name is Kat Johnson, and my big picture purpose is I want to create a world of people who are activated and connected, doing work they love. And the way I go about doing that, my lane in all of this, is through supporting co-working space operators so that they can then support their members who are doing work that is meaningful, fulfilling. I have a number of ways I do that. I have a marketing club for indie spaces. I have a monthly virtual event series called Coworking Convos, and I do coaching, different things. We have a project coming up that has not yet been announced, but we're going to start some mastermind sessions. So my whole world is co-working, community, connection, and supporting the operator so that they can then support their members.
Well, listen, it's wonderful. There's a lot to unpack there. So let's get into it, Kat. So when we talk about co-working, the world went through this, lockdown. Most countries, most businesses got impacted by it. Unfortunately, some people got impacted worse than others. But it did, if it left us with nothing else, it probably left us with a new way of working. It left us thinking about the future work. It left us thinking about how we want to work. And I suppose there's a big element of that when it comes to co-working spaces. But maybe could you just tell me a little bit more about your view on co-working spaces? Particularly, I know these sort of indie co-working spaces. Why are they so vital? Why are they so important? And why are you so passionate about it, Kat?
Yeah, I love that question. So to backstep my story, I worked in record stores for 20 years, selling records, going to shows, doing this whole thing. Started doing music writing. Music writing led to writing about arts, culture. That somehow morphed into writing about community projects, where I discovered this kind of budding movement called co-working and immediately was intrigued by it. I was still working full-time at the record store, kind of freelance writing on the side, but joined a co-working space. And to make a long story short, I'm a product of co-working. I went from a side gigging record store nerd into like a part-time freelance writer, full-time freelance writer, business owner, brand builder. Like this whole ecosystem has been built while I've been in co-working. So I'm very passionate, and I understand firsthand the transformation that can happen in a good co-working space. Like the potential of a bunch of people who are bought in on each other, on the space, on collaboration, on connection. Like I learned about contracts, and I got my headshots done at my first co-working, like all the things I needed to start down this kind of road of business, and really feeling like activating myself. When I was in the record store, I knew that I had some potential that I hadn't tapped into, and co-working helped me to do that. So that's why I'm so passionate about it, because I've experienced that transformation. I want everybody to have a chance to pursue their potential in that way. And to the first question, the COVID. So the way we talk about it in the industry, like remote work was a thing before COVID, right? People did it, yeah, engineers, some freelancers, things like that. But the way we talk about it is that COVID accelerated the remote movement by 10 years, right? It just forced the issues. Companies had to figure it out. It was no longer like something they might think about down the road. It was like, this is happening now. How are you going to deal with it? So during COVID was hard on co-working spaces. A lot of the indies, not all of the spaces made it, right? The whole game was just figuring out how to keep the doors open or locked, how to pay the rent, how to keep things going, whether that meant working with landlords or having different memberships, like virtual co-working became a thing during COVID. Just figuring out, a lot of hustling to just figure out how to make it through COVID. And now that we're on the other side of it, the growth projections for co-working are really insane, like 5 times as many co-working spaces as there are now by the end of the decade. So co-working's really nicely positioned, but there's still a huge piece around like, what is co-working? I have an office at home. Why should I pay for it? There's just still a lot of education as much as it's grown.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And thanks for sharing that, because I think a lot of people are working remotely, if not full time, maybe hybrid. We hear that word a lot, don't we? But hybrid now, I think, means maybe you head into the office if you work for a medium or large company and they've got a physical presence, maybe a day or two a week. I think very few people, at least in the people that I talk to, are having to commute in and out 5 days a week like they did maybe pre-pandemic. But then there are maybe startups and indies and smaller, more agile type companies who are really leading this charge. And I see lots of people who, as you say, they have a really great setup at home. I mean, they literally have everything they need at home, uh, but they still value the benefit of being able to go in to a co-working space, as you say, to learn things, to interact, to communicate, to sometimes to socialize, sometimes just to hang out with other people. And when you talk about indie co-working spaces, because we've seen some really big ones, haven't we, come and go. When you talk about an indie co-working space, what defines that?
That's a common question. And I think the most accurate thing, people can self-select whether they're an indie, because there are some spaces that there's only one location, but they operate more like an executive suite, more like an office rental space, where there are others that have dozens of locations that they really have that indie ethos. So what that means for me is there's a lot of flexibility for each space to be hyper-focused on the community, to adjust accordingly, to be engaged with the extended community outside of the space, to invite people in, to really become like a local hub for not just entrepreneurs and small businesses and startups, but it starts to extend into nonprofits and social impact organizations and initiatives where there can really be a local impact, in addition to helping people activate their life, their business, their passions, their ideas. There's also, indies really become part of the fabric of the local community and economy in a way that I think a massive international brand that just plops locations here, there, and everywhere can't have that same impact.
No, 100%. And I think, we're living in a world with AI now. We are living with more technical software type tools than we've ever had in our history. And the ability to scale and to grow businesses in a co-working environment is probably greater now than it's ever been. And we're seeing that, aren't we? We're seeing the no longer the requirement to raise, a lot of money to give you that huge runway, because you don't have the same overhead, you don't have the same cash burn coming through. But I do want to maybe just pivot the story a little bit and ask you a little bit about the lab side of things, because as well as co-working, you have this thing about the lab, don't you? Could you maybe explore that a little bit for us? Because I think that'll be particularly interesting to people watching and listening.
I do. I absolutely adore the lab. So this is the marketing club for indie co-working spaces, and the lab was born during COVID. My friend Hector, friend, collaborator, partner, he was living in Greece and Cyprus during their banking crisis, and he said most people sat around complaining about how bad things were. The smart people got to work building. And I was like, this is early COVID. I was like, okay, let's do what the smart people did. And I had been toying with this idea of a membership community. So started piecing it together, figuring out the tech. Like you said, with the tech these days, it's like the biggest challenge is knowing what not to do, because you can just do anything. But we figured out how we wanted to run it and what that might look like. And I started reaching out, and first there was one member, and then there were three, and then there were, it just grew really organically during COVID. it was as much a mental health support community as it was like marketing and branding and things. Like we were doing the workshops and doing the educational piece, but everyone was just at home. So we would hop on and do work sprints and Zoom calls and happy hours and whatever, just to have that sense of connection. So now, a few years later, where are we? 4 years later, it's a thriving membership community. We have creeping up on 80 members, so co-working spaces from all around the world. We still do the educational piece. We have all the resource library, all the things to help with the marketing, but the heart and soul of the lab is still the community piece. It's still that connection, because one of the great ironies of being a community builder in a co-working space is it can be very lonely, right? You're building this community, but a lot of things you're having to do isolated and doing on your own. So community builders also need to feel like they're part of a community. And that, I think, is the biggest value in the lab, is that they're just connected to people who speak their language and understand what they're doing.
Yeah, and that's a real value now. And I think, 80 is no small number. There's a lot of moving parts to that, and I'm sure it's international at this stage. So it has um, not only that support network and that feeling of belonging from a community perspective, which is really important. But I know as somebody working in that type of way, you can get overwhelmed. You can have problems that you can't fix. Some people, it might be, how do I get leads for my business? I've built this great thing, but I'm struggling with lead development. How do I get revenue in? How do I raise money or finance? I need to hire some people. I don't know how to go about that. And is that what you see in that sort of lab environment where people are maybe sharing ideas and you guys are able to steer them in the right direction? Because with that footprint, you must have an awful lot of knowledge built up over those 4 or 5 years.
That you just hit it right on the head. There is so much co-working experience, hundreds of years of co-working experience in the lab. And some people who join, they're a brand new community manager who learned about co-working a month ago. And other people have been running spaces for 12 or 15 years or longer. They extend back into like the executive suite world. So there's a huge range of experience. But the thing that's so beautiful, it's definitely true in co-working. I think it's true just in the world at large, is what one person is really good at, another person may know nothing about, but then something else, like for instance, someone may know a lot about leases and agreements and how to handle a member who did this or that or the other because they've been doing this for 15 years, where a brand new operator might be really good at Instagram Reels or using Canva to create graphics. So it's just this incredible tapestry of support. And the lab, from the very, very beginning, we've set a tone of generosity. Like, for instance, lab members will ask, does anyone have a member agreement I can look at? And people will be like, sure, and drop their link. Like, this is unlike other industries, right? Where everything's carefully guarded and this big secret. The ethos of co-working has always been, a rising tide lifts all ships. It's very much that. There's enough room for everybody and there's enough demand for everyone. Every space should be different, should attract different people. There's just, when we come from kind of that abundance place, incredible things happen. And we see that all the time in the lab.
And from a co-working perspective, then obviously, my mind thinks of people traveling to a physical location to co-work, to be with other people. But obviously, during the pandemic, it was very different. We had this virtual co-working. Is virtual still a component of that? Are you still doing a lot of online activities that complement the physical in person? How does that work in a modern co-working environment today?
Yeah, it's so interesting you asked that, Simon. We were just talking about this yesterday. So with the remote movement comes a lot of isolation, loneliness. We're in a loneliness epidemic. And one of the things that you may be seeing articles about this, they call it body doubling or work sprints or co-working virtually. But the idea is like you and I would get together, set a timer, like, okay, we're going to hold each other accountable for the next hour. We're going to be here and just working and focused. And it's really interesting, something about having the timer and an accountability buddy. It's really a productive thing. Plus, it gives you that point of contact. Like we can chat for a few minutes in between work sprints or something. So it's really dipped down from during COVID, but I feel like there's a piece there where co-working spaces could explore that, because not all of their members are going to be in the space every day. People are traveling, but may still want to hop in. But I think for most spaces, it wouldn't work. But I think some of the hyper community focused ones, it really could.
No, thanks for your insights there. And I think it comes back to that word, doesn't it? Community. Because it seems to be, regardless of where we are on the planet now, we can all, to some degree, reach out and connect with each other relatively simply. Um, but look, I do want to move on because there's so much to talk to you about and so little time. But we're talking to people here on the global discussion, right? People are watching and listening to us, but you're no stranger to the microphone and the camera. So, co-working out loud, can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, Co-working Out Loud is a podcast. It's really a project, a passion project. It's a podcast that kind of in fits and starts, comes and goes, but it's really exploring the deeper side of co-working content and community. And that's like my sweet spot, the place where those content overlaps with community. Co-working kind of encompasses that whole thing. So I like to just talk to people, try to get into the deeper thing of why they do what they do.
I think what's really good about that, if people want to catch up with that show, is that you have these very um, different individuals giving it from their personal perspective, right? And I think that adds a real richness to the conversation. So, yeah, people should go over and check out the podcast for sure. And of course, that brings me nicely onto the book. You're really busy, Kat, right? So there we go. Let's hear all about it. Tell us about how
I
it came about. What was the experience like
oh
writing it? And what do people get when they get their hands on a copy? What's in there?
Yeah, so I am busy. I have more ideas than I know what to do with. I have to really stop myself. Like, is this a worthwhile thing or just a cool idea? The Daily Coast. So I'm a natural writer. The way I came into content marketing was through, I was a writer for many years. I told you music writing, community writing, all the things. So that is a skill that comes pretty naturally and comfortably to me. So I write, my newsletter, blog posts, social posts, LinkedIn posts, like there's tons of writing everywhere. And I wanted to kind of capture some of the best of that and some of my, I guess, Simon, the most important thing to me is making sure that as co-working grows into this huge industry, that we understand the roots in community and co-working and how important and transformational this can be. So the Daily Co is my attempt to give co-working space operators and community builders just a little bite-size piece, like a sentence or two each day, really short little things, just some thoughts about community, about connection, about the importance of co-working, because for community builders, it's a really challenging job to be in a co-working space because they're making the coffee, giving the tours, writing the newsletter, dealing with members that have a problem with it. Like there's a lot of moving parts in any moment. There's no way they could ever say, okay, this day I'm going to schedule it in half-hour blocks. It's like all things all the time, right? So it's a hard job. And I wanted to give them some encouragement on the hard days and just keep them really stoked and inspired on the good days about how important this work is, that co-working really has the potential to transform work, which means transforming lives, which means transforming neighborhoods and towns. And there's a ripple effect here that maybe is starry-eyed, but I feel it and I see it all the time.
It's an excellent point, and as you were talking there, it reminds me of a few people that I've had conversations with, and they're very invested with governments around predominantly Europe, but also further afield, where they're trying to regenerate areas where people have left an area, they've left a village, they've left a town. The population's declining, the population may be getting older, and by creating these hubs and these vibrant new communities, they're finding that all of a sudden it breathes life back into an area.
And allows people to stay,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Where it you and this COVID helped with this too, but, small towns, rural areas, the suburbs, people used to have to come into the city to co-work or collaborate or work with like minds, and now people can live where they want, so there are co-working spaces popping up in places that couldn't have sustained them before, but now that there's enough remote, so yeah, governments are interested, economic development organizations are interested. For years, people have been trying to figure out what is the economic impact of co-working. And I haven't seen any great numbers on it, but it's definitely there because where there's a co-working space, restaurants around, coffee shops around, they're all going to benefit from having a dense hub of people who are there a few times a week, a few times a month, whatever the case may be. But the impact is definitely there with co-working.
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful, and I'm personally, I love the remote first type environment where people, have moved mentally, and I'm talking about business owners, the C-suite, and small businesses where mentally you've already made the shift that says, look, it's not about how many hours I commute or how many hours I spend in a cubicle or a corner office. It's about the execution, the output of the work, the quality of the work, the bottom line, etc. And also, I think there's a human element to it too, which I want to ask you about, which is the what type of work do I want to do? How do I want to work? So whether that's somebody who's maybe raising a family or just somebody who lives in a rural environment, it does open that up a little bit, doesn't it? Maybe leveling the playing field a little bit. You must see that, Kat.
I do see it. And I think, Simon, the most valuable thing is the flexibility. And COVID really spoiled us with that. And people don't want to go back to commuting an hour each way each day. It's such a burn of time, takes away from family, takes away from quality of life. So with remote workers who are able to, as you said, like it now becomes an output measurement. It's like this remote work puts the pressure on managers, right? Rather than the time clock where people are here from 9 to 5, puts the pressure on managers to make sure everything's, to delegate and make sure it comes in. And if people get it done, whatever timeline works for them, if they need to leave in the middle of the day for their kid's soccer match or go to the doctor, they don't have to ask someone. Like there's this real humanness that goes along with flexibility, right? Like I'll work later today because I know I'm going to go to lunch with my dad, but things like that. So I think that COVID, one of the benefits, it really showed us kind of who we are and what we value. And the idea of sitting in a car commuting an hour each way, 5 days a week is just insane.
I couldn't agree more. And I think that's the best way anybody could put it. It makes no sense. And we do see people that are, maybe holding the lease agreements or the purchase agreements on very big, shiny glass and steel buildings who are almost forcing some of their employees back to the office. But we're seeing an awful lot of pushback on that, whether that's in the US or the UK or wherever people are. People seem to want to work differently now, and it seems to be here to stay. And I know you talk about this too, because I do want to squeeze this question in for you, because we've talked a little bit about the book and the podcast, but you've also done a lot of sort of panel discussions, haven't you, with this sort of convo series? And that's really interesting because you've really scaled the amount of conversations that you've had there. So could you tell us a bit about those? I don't know if they're happening monthly or what the frequency is, but you've got a lot of content there.
I'd love to. Yeah. So Co-working Convos, it's a monthly virtual event series. And the intention with Convos is to provide a space for co-working space operators to learn, share, and connect. We keep it really informal. I invite 4 guests for each one. I host and moderate. our guests share for 5 to 7 minutes their tips, insight, strategies around a specific topic. The last one last week was how to give great tours of your co-working space. So we have 4 all-star operators who are sharing what they know, sharing how they do it. And it's another example of how a guest one month will be a student or a participant the next month, right? Like everyone has a different strength, a different skill set, but there's a ton of content. I try to really get people who are excellent at whatever the topic is. And my goal is to have people who attend convos just walk away with pages of tips and to-dos and thoughts and things. It's part of that elevating everybody. If everyone gets better at tours, if everyone gets better at sales, if everyone gets better at marketing, co-working as a whole rises. And that is the whole game for me.
I love that. I love that. Really, really good. Now, you mentioned earlier that you've got lots of great ideas, but we've touched on just the number of things that you're involved in, and there's a lot of work behind the scenes on this. And it just makes me wonder about how you go about planning, because when you look forward, whether it's the next 6 months, the next 16 months or 36 months, what are you thinking about? How do you plan, in your business? What's on your roadmap? What's on your horizon? And how does that work in your world?
So everything, I'm working to grow the lab. I'm working to grow convos. I'm always working to grow my brand and my presence. So that's kind of the underlying thing, is making sure that forward momentum, things that move the ball down the field. For a while, I was kind of caught in this thing of creating content just to create content. And I've really been focused on making sure that what I'm creating is so aligned with what I'm doing that it's really moving the whole thing forward. So I'm really happy with the lab convos, the things I'm doing. We have a mastermind program launching that I haven't spoken aloud with anyone but my team. But I'm really excited about that. It's going to be a deeper dive into things, longer sessions where I can share everything I've learned. So that's on the near horizon. Um, I have people who help me. I think one of the things I'm good at is finding people who are very good at one thing and hiring them to help me on a contractor basis with that thing, right? It's like, then I know when I need a design, I talk to Imran. When it's like everything's just very specific. Because as a company of 1+, like I have 5 contractors I work with, but it's really me, right? I collaborate with people, but at the end of the day, it's me. Um, I have to use my resources wisely. I have to use my time really wisely. I have to make sure I always come back to being focused on what am I doing? Why am I here? Because it's easy. I'm a creative, I'm a triple air sign. I have all the ideas all the time. So I have to bring myself back grounded to what are we doing? Where are we going? And so I honestly, I track my days, like I schedule my days in half-hour slots. I'm very like that the night before, very specific about what the day is going to look like. Things come up and things move around, but keeping the big picture vision in place, keeping my purpose of creating a world of activated and connected people doing work they love, making sure everything feels aligned with that. But then getting down to half-hour increments of how am I going to get all this done? How am I going to make this all work into this puzzle? So it's kind of a back and forth of like every day looking big picture, making sure we're on track, making sure upcoming projects are aligned, but then getting super granular about what needs to happen in this next 30 minutes.
I really like that, because often, people, we put in an hour's meeting when actually it needs a 5 minutes or could be done by
Right.
an email, and everything in between. And those sort of 30-minute increments, I think that's really smart. And also, I loved what you were saying as well about creating content that actually moves the needle, that moves the ball down the field, that actually moves you in the direction that you want to go. Because there's always a new tool, a new shiny object to look at. There's always content we could be producing, but I think you're asking the really smart question, and that's real valuable to people watching and listening to this, real valuable advice, because I think we're all guilty of it. I know I'm guilty of it. You can get really busy on things that maybe either look good, look impressive, make you feel good. But when you truly drill down into the essence of saying, is that actually moving me forward towards the goal that I'm focused on? And it's only by doing that and by you sharing that, I think that it's really important, isn't it, that we can just tighten that focus up, because that's when the real difference happens. So thanks for sharing that, Kat. And look,
Of
before we run
course.
out of time, because we will, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our worldwide audience today while they're watching or listening to us? And secondly, and really importantly, if people want to catch up with your world, find out about the book, the podcast, the conversations, the panels, the community, where's the best place to point people to?
Hey, I'll reverse those questions. The best place to connect is catjohnson.co. It's cat with a C. That will lead you to everything. I'm on LinkedIn. Cat Johnson Co. is the handle you'll find me. And what I want to leave people with is the potential impact that a single person can have on their neighborhood, their community, the world. And my goal is that if we can help people tap into their potential rather than just wasting away doing whatever, just phoning it in for decades, that there's an incredible potential there for good in the world. I feel like when we're all activated, when we're doing things that light us up, that we're passionate about, that we're fully engaged, my sister calls it firing on all cylinders, right? That something truly magical happens, and that then we get those people. You and I are connecting, and then I'll connect with someone later, and you'll connect with someone later. But this thing is happening where our world is troubled right now, but there's so much incredible human potential and beauty. And it's just a matter of understanding how much potential we each have and working to bring that into the world.
Well, Kat, that brings us nicely to the end of our episode and to the end of our discussion today here on the Global Discussion. Before I do wrap up, I just want to thank everybody who's watching or listening to the show. Make sure that you follow, like, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the Global Discussion, and go and check out catjohnson.co. There's a wonderful wealth of information there. I really encourage you to do that. And make sure that you join me back here for maybe some more discussions with creatives and leaders and thinkers and people firing on all cylinders like Kat. So thanks very much, Kat. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you again today.
Simon, it's my honor. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a great chat.